Harper and I'm the founder of Editia, which is publisher of the book. When I first suggested a collection of letters to Peter Greste in July 2014, it was with the intention of supporting the campaign to bring Peter home. I know you'll all agree that the best thing about tonight is that Peter is here with us.
Yes.
That said, we are thinking of his colleagues, Mohammed and Mohammed Fahmy, and will continue to support the Free AJ Staff campaign as they, together with Peter, fight to clear their names following the devastating verdict last Saturday. Towards the end of the proceedings tonight, I'll ask you all to post for a photo with a poster along these lines. I'm sure you've seen some of these things on social media. Look at this big room. I think it's another great opportunity.
A little slower.
Okay. It's always handy to have your dad in the room.
Come down the front. Come down the front.
They were lecturing me about this on the way up. Before that, we're going to hear from some letter writers and from Peter. Peter will respond to some questions from me and from you. And then he'll sign some copies of the book at the end. I'd like to start the official proceedings, though, with a video featuring some key players in this story who can't be with us tonight. But none of us would be here without them. Here's some of what the letter writers had to say about the Greste family. The intelligence and grace with which you have all conducted yourselves during the campaign has been inspirational and deeply moving. I can imagine everyone wants to get back to their regular lives, but selfishly, I hope we don't lose the Greste family from public life entirely. If any of our leaders in various fields have been paying attention, they could have picked up some excellent lessons. That's from Amy Denman. And this from Eleanor Dare. I was particularly struck by the bravery of your parents over the past days and months. The dignity and restraint they have shown, in conjunction with their quiet articulacy, has been an inspiration to all.
Okay, Peter, I'll cover you.
Andrew and Mike set up the email address for letters of support to Peter in prison. They took turns delivering them when visiting Peter. Later, their parents, Eurus and Lois, visited too, bringing more letters. I think that was around Christmas time. Meanwhile, back in Australia, Andrew's wife Kylie selected which messages to forward on, replying to them when necessary, while Mike's wife Nikki manned the Free Peter Greste Facebook page.
I was overwhelmed with the knowledge that so many strangers were actually gripped by the whole case.
For the prison authorities to loosen the rules and allow those letters in was just a great step forward, and for him to, and I think many of them got read more than once by Peter. To be able to give him that bunch of letters was just, it was a great connection.
He really was encouraged by them and looked forward to receiving them.
We had this stack that we took in every time, and I couldn't stop reading them. I kept telling Peter. And there were some wonderful things that made me laugh and just, just so helpful. And I was so thrilled about them all. And taking it in was a real joy because I knew that would be his response also.
We weren't really expecting what we got, so both Facebook and the email, we got a huge amount of support. So and that helped us to get some strength through, the support that came through the letters.
We got, a good 1,000 in 2 days. I didn't want to let him down, so I had to just pick the ones that I thought would resonate with him.
I think there are any number of messages, wonderful messages in the letters that we're looking forward to reading them all again.
I'm so grateful, totally grateful for them because it helped us continue on.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for the honour of being here today to talk at this really important occasion. And I guess I wanted to share a little bit about my motivation and hope that touches the other authors in talking about why it is we set aside our lives for brief periods to reach out to the Grestes. Firstly, it's very timely that we see the Grestes on film again, because I'm sure all of you who contributed today were profoundly, to the emails, were profoundly moved, as I was, by the tragedy unfolding on our televisions. We had a remarkable Australian family who carried themselves with such dignity and courage in the face of extraordinary adversity and injustice. And it touched thousands of people all over the world, and our family was one of those. So we decided, I decided that I would do a mission which was happy distraction to try and bring a little bit of joy and light-hearted humour in a dark, bleak Egyptian prison. So, I think many of us writers, really all we wanted to do was build a little bit of hope for some people facing such hard times and so worthy of hope, because they were facing such an injustice. It was clear that Peter carried an enormous weight on his shoulders because for his entire career, 30 years or something, he'd been such a respected journalist, as a champion in his field globally and well respected. And so it wasn't just that he was imprisoned, it was that the world was looking at him and how he and his family would cope with that incarceration. And we were all incredibly impressed by their resilience and capacity to cope. And we thought that it was very important that we set aside our own lives for a moment and support their cause. So we did that. We gave with no expectation as authors. We just wrote. We sat down and wrote, and we wrote into the void, which is what it was. It goes the email and off it goes. And you don't know what will happen. You have no idea of the response. You give with no expectation of receiving. And I think that certainly from my perspective as an author, what the most remarkable thing for me here tonight is the fact that I'm here tonight. Is that it's not just the email that was sent in the moment to cheer him up. It's the fact that from that has become an amazing book that I hope that will inspire the world to continue on fighting for freedom, fighting for justice, fighting for Peter and his colleagues' name to be cleared, fighting for Fahmy and Bahir to be let out of that prison. So today is another step. It's a stepping stone, and I hope that we all buy a very large number of books and give it to all our friends and our families and our neighbours and share it in our communities, and we use it as a source of inspiration for all those around us to continue to fight for Fahmy and Bahir's freedom and for Peter and his friends to be cleared. Thank you.
Paige tells me that she's wearing purple tonight because it's the colour of liberty. Oh. Gorgeous, Paige. And thanks for coming so far. Yes, it was in June 2014, and I was the editor-in-chief of this huge apparatus called the Hoopla, an online magazine, and Peter and his colleagues were jailed in Egypt, and we had a correspondent in the Middle East, Yara Bou Melhem, who was, I believe, she worked for Al Jazeera at times and was an occasional colleague of yours, I think, Peter. And she wrote this article, which she said, he feels isolated. And this is how the story went. I was picking up Andrew Greste outside of Cairo's notorious Tora prison, where he had been visiting his brother Peter the day after he was dealt a shocking 7-year sentence by an Egyptian court. It was the first time he'd seen Peter since the verdict was handed down, and he was still raw from their 45-minute meeting. Quote, we tell him about the campaigns and what people are saying, but he's so cut off. No computers, no internet, nothing. He's only received 3 letters while he's been in prison, and he really appreciated getting those, he said as we negotiated the Cairo traffic. 3 letters, that's it. Andrew, a cotton farmer from Toowoomba, and his younger brother Michael, a police officer, have spent the past 4 months between them in Egypt. They tag team, each brother spending about a month at a time in Cairo just to be with Peter. They relay updates on Peter's case and news from the outside world, but realise now that he still feels cut off. In the car, Andrew and Michael devise a way to get messages of support to Peter. Within minutes, they create an email address for their appeal to the public, freepetergreste@gmail.com. Well, we ran that story in the Hoopla, and we also said, if you would like the Hoopla to send on your behalf a letter of support to Peter Greste and his colleagues, leave a comment in the thread below and we will send emails from the Hoopla community. I'll leave it to Peter to explain just how he came to see that correspondence, but within a very short time we had 128 letters and I just loved every one. I'd like to read a few, many of which were addressed not only to Peter but his colleagues as well, but here's a selection, and I love them so much for their intimacy and their kindness, and I was rereading them last night and thinking how much compassion there is in this Australian community that I think we've lost sight of and we don't understand about ourselves anymore. But there it was for me in those emails, and that's why I will read you some. This one's from Honey Brown. My thoughts go out to you, my heart goes out to you. And I'm going to actually cry doing this because every time I read it, I get it. My thoughts go out to you, my heart goes out to you. If the combined goodwill of all of us here in Australia could be harnessed, packaged and airlifted over to you, it would flatten those cell walls and locked doors. It would pick you up and carry you home. And I love all the little personal touches. Here's a few snippets. Dear Peter, don't think you are forgotten. I'm an aged care nurse in Perth. And when the verdict came down, I was with a lady in her late 90s. And she looked up and said, "That's not right." And it isn't, Peter. Full stop. Here's another one. Hello, Peter. I want you to know that my husband and I stood in complete silence when we heard the verdict. Our 14-year-old daughter asked us what had happened, and we said you're being imprisoned for being a journalist and do what journalists do. And I love the ones for the blokes. Ones for the blokes were especially good. Dear Peter, in news from home, Melbourne is windy and rainy. Clive Palmer and Al Gore are now environmental mates. Hashtag Palm Gore. MasterChef is down to the last combatants. And the World Cup has been going on for a long time. Australia hasn't won any games, but no surprises there. Here's another one. Dear Peter, Melbourne is cold. The Hawks were beaten by the Dockers. The government keep putting their feet in their mouths. I know. And then there were the ones that were so poetic and lovely. This is from Meg. After a cold and drizzly Melbourne winter, the first of the daffodils are blooming in my garden, and the first wattles blooming in the Yarra Valley. The appearance of these golden yellow flowers always brightens my thoughts and gives me hope of better times ahead. While you cannot see these beautiful flowers from within your prison cell, I know that you can picture them in your mind, and I hope you can hold within you the positive thoughts for a bright future. How about this one from Tassie? This one's brilliant, from Helen. I'm sitting in a shed in the far south of Tasmania. It's wintry and glittering outside. The fire is going and I'm baking a pumpkin cheesecake for an afternoon tea where a few of us will present a crochet blanket that we had a hand in making to a new baby. And here's one, and this is the one that makes me cry. I was reading it last night, having a good old hell. This one's from Liz. And come back soon. The kookaburras, currawongs, butcherbirds and magpies are calling for you. Greste, in their beautiful own language. Us too. Isn't that just divine? Anyway, sorry. And finally, this one is from the eminent publisher, journalist and editor Richard Walsh, who's with us tonight and is also another jailbird like a good self. And this is part of his letter. In my callow youth, I was sentenced here in Sydney to 6 months hard labour for some feeble journalism I had written. And you'll have to, I'll just ask you to go and ask Richard to fill you in on all that, because it's too long a story to tell, isn't it?
Yeah. Already.
That was a shock, but merely a flea bite compared to your current experience. At least we had the prospect of bail and the possibility of taking the matter to a higher court, where surely good sense would prevail. In the case of myself and my co-accused, our appeal was successful. I know that your path to justice is nothing like as simple as that. If I have learned anything in my lifetime, it is that the truth does ultimately prevail. But it often takes time. I can only hope that you are strong and that the enormous support there is for you here in Australia, throughout the world, can keep you strong. Cheers, Richard Walsh. So as you can see, those wonderful, wonderful letters came from reprobates, mums in Tassie, bird brains who looked out the window and imagine they were talking to birds. Who knows? People who barrack for the dockers. What the fuck can you do about that? So, thank you, Peter, and so good to see you here. Who can believe it? Thank you for inviting me, and including me in your book.
Hello. I decided to write to Peter because that's what I do when people are in trouble. A year before Peter was unjustly imprisoned in Egypt, my friend Jake was diagnosed with a really bad kind of leukemia, and his family, they moved to Brisbane. There was literally nothing that I could do, and so I started writing letters to him. Today, he's out of his wheelchair and back at school in Queensland. Mostly, we chat on Facebook, but last week I wrote him another letter. I just think a letter, it says so much. Personally, I love getting letters. They're so much fun. But it also says that I'm thinking of you, and I care enough about you to spend the time to put these words down on paper. When I sat down to write my letter to Peter, I tried to imagine what he'd want to hear. All I knew was that he was a journalist, and so I told him about the crazy headlines in the news. And I really wanted to tell him that even though he didn't know, because as Wendy said, he didn't have access to the internet, the whole world was thinking about him, and that you weren't forgotten. The one thing that I never imagined was that my terribly rambling letter would end up in a book. It's a little scary to think that other people might actually read it, but I'm also very proud. Thank you, Peter, for choosing my letter and for not judging me on my awful grammar and stupid Finally, can I just say that I am so glad this book is being published, because it means that at last, Peter is home.
The injustice of Peter's imprisonment for doing his job as a journalist focused Australians' minds on the importance of a free press to democracy. Although he is home with his family, and we are delighted that he is, his colleagues Baher Mohammed and Mohammed Fahmy are in prison, and Peter's work as a foreign correspondent rendered impossible by the recent court verdict. More than 200 journalists around the world are in prison. Journalists often face great danger to report the truth. One danger they should never face is prosecution for simply doing their jobs. Tanya Pipson. I'd also like to mention at this point that all profits from the sale of Prison Post in the first year will go to the Foreign Prisoner Support Service. Martin Hodgson from that organisation is here tonight. He is hard at work on a new case in Saudi Arabia. Now, he's a man of the hour. He's been a delight to work with from afar in recent months. And in fact, he came up with the title for the book, Once Free Peter Greste, no longer applied. Thank you, Peter. I've only met him in person on 3 occasions. Like so many Australians, though, I felt as though I knew him, because so much of his character has been evident in the way he has carried himself throughout this ordeal. Before handing over to Peter, I'd like to read an extract from a letter, perhaps my favourite one in the book, by Corny van der Merwe, that sums it up for me. I was in Rob Ferreira when you were an exchange student in 1983. I was shocked when I heard your name on the news about your arrest and the trial. I remembered you and your camera so well during the year you were a Robbie. That camera and your smile. It was a brilliant smile. That. Hope you haven't lost it during the time you were so unfairly treated, and that it will shine again. Probably one of my best memories of you was that one of my friends had this huge crush on you and had your name doodled all over her school diary, which fell out of her bag, and you just had to be the person who retrieved it for her. As she stood there red-faced, you handed her the diary back and said, "Don't feel bad, I feel honoured." I just have to say this is still corny, not me. I have to admit, after that I had a little crush on you myself. And my thinking is, what a kind young man. And he hasn't changed, has he? Over to you, Peter.
Events. It's traditional for the author of the book to be the one that stands up here and signs. And the one thing that's patently obvious is that if we were to get every author to pay to sign these things, there'd be no room in the book for anything else. A lot of people are, in fact it happened today, I was giving an interview for the ABC, and I was asked about how I felt about my experience, what lessons I've taken away about human nature, and the kind of answer that most people expect me to give when they ask that kind of question is an answer full of cynicism about the cruelty of other people, about what people do to me, what they've done to us, putting us in prison, staging a sham trial, convicting us on no evidence. But I've been a foreign correspondent for a lot of years, and one of the things that I've learned over those years is that these extreme kinds of environments bring out the very worst in people, but they also bring out the very best. And what we tend to forget is just the basic innate goodness of human beings. And the one thing that this experience has taught me is that for the handful of guys that put us in prison, there are literally thousands, and I mean thousands of people who wrote these letters. If we could put every letter in that was written, we would have volumes half the size of this damn bookstore. It was the people that got off their asses, people like Pippa and Paige and Wendy and all of the others that are here this evening who put pen to paper, who took the trouble to write to us, out of nothing other than genuine compassion for those of us who are stuck in prison. That was the thing that restores your faith in human nature. That's what makes you get up in the morning. And I promise you, I read those letters so many times. One point, the prison authorities got a bit fed up with the numbers of letters that were coming through. And so they said, look, okay, here's the thing. You're only allowed 3 letters a month. So what my family did was did a little bit of editing and came up with 3 letters that were each about 16 pages, which they stuck all of these letters together in one long screen, trusting, of course, that the Egyptian English wasn't that good. It wasn't good enough to really figure out what was going on. And I would get the letters and I'd sit there and I would tease them out over several days. It was the hardest thing to do, I've got to tell you. But as we've already heard, the thing that was extraordinary about the letters was the way that they conveyed the beauty of the mundane. And I don't mean that in any kind of sarcastic way. I mean that genuinely. As the extracts from the letters that Wendy read out, It made you realise just how special the little things are in life, the relationship with your family, the birds singing outside, the footy scores that you read. That's what really made it special. That's the thing that I really enjoyed. That's what made me appreciate the beauty of what we have, of a stable, prosperous, wonderful life that we've got here in Australia. And so this book is not about me. It really isn't. I'm on the front page of it. And I feel a little bit embarrassed. I shouldn't be here. Charlotte, I've got to thank you for all of your work in putting this thing. I mean, it started out, and remember, I think everyone also really needs to understand when this book began. It began when I was still in prison, as an idea to help support the family, raise money for the campaign. And when I was finally released and the idea was fairly well developed, we realised that we couldn't just let this go. We had to take it, we had to do something with it. We had to honour the people that both wrote these letters and, frankly, your idea and your efforts, and do something and turn it into something productive. And that's why I'm also very proud that the proceeds are going to support the Foreign Prison Support Service. This is a little-known organisation, works off a shoestring. One of those, we always talk, there's a lot of cynicism about how aid money it goes to pay for grand conferences and fancy hotels. Martin Hodgson, who runs Foreign Prisoner Support Service, sold his motorbike, his only form of transport, to actually keep the thing going, particularly through the period that they were campaigning for us. So I can't think of a better, more honourable, more useful charity to receive the profits. So on that score alone, this project is worthwhile. This book is a credit to everyone involved, everyone who wrote, not just to those whose letters made it in here, but to everyone who put pen to paper, to everyone who supported us. And there is one other thing I want to point out this evening. We got a lot of political support. Anyone who's watched the reaction to our conviction last week would know we've had statements from the White House, statements from Julie Bishop, statements from the Foreign Office, the British Foreign Office, statements from Ban Ki-moon. The reason that those people spoke is, and I know some of them, for them the concern is genuine, but the reason they spoke publicly was because they knew that the public cared. This is one of those things, this is one of those really rare moments where you had a huge amount of political support that really welled up from the bottom up. Do you know how many impressions the Free AJ Staff hashtag got? In the year that I was in prison, and that's not counting what happened this year, but in the 400 days, over 400 days that I was in prison, the Free AJ Staff hashtag got 3 billion impressions. Billion with a B. Now, to be fair, I know my family is probably responsible for 1 billion of those. But it was that push, that shove from below, which really made this thing important. I would not be standing here today if it weren't for that effort. I know that we're not through this. My colleagues are back in prison. I'm now a convicted felon with a 3-year prison sentence hanging over my head. But I'm telling you, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for the likes of you lot. So this is a credit to everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you again. And
the very first batch of letters that arrived, and if you remember that moment and how you felt at that time.
The first batch of letters, I remember my brothers bringing in, and they told me that this was just a small selection of a whole lot of them. And I just, honestly, I couldn't believe, and what, in a way the reaction I felt that first moment was a reaction that was repeated every time they brought in another batch of letters. It was just a kind of staggering disbelief at the fact that ordinary people actually cared enough. They gave a shit. They gave enough of a shit to get up off their backsides and actually put not just time and energy, but real thought and passion into these letters. I mean, the compassion of the letters that Wendy wrote out, the compassion that you find throughout this book was a thing that lifted me out of my out of the doldrums. It was the thing that kept us going so many times. Whenever things looked dark, believe me, all I have to do is reach for those letters.
Yeah. There were lots of letters as well from former colleagues of yours from the BBC and from Jazeera and all over the world. That must have given you a great sense of camaraderie with your fellow journalists.
Yeah, there are a few other journalists here this evening, I think. Wendy, too, amongst them. And I think one of the things that we've often talked about this, one of the most extraordinary parts about this whole episode was the way that this thing seemed to unify the journalism community. And anyone who knows the industry, you don't actually need to know the industry too well to recognise that it's full of a bunch of cranky, cantankerous, pig-headed sycophants who would rather eat their own babies than acknowledge the opposition. This was different. For some reason, I still can't put my finger on why, but for some reason, this incident, this episode, united the journalism community in a way that I don't think we've ever seen in the history and certainly in the modern history of this industry, of this business. We saw Christiane Amanpour and CNN holding up the Free AJ Staff hashtag. We saw the entire BBC newsroom standing outside the broadcasting house with Free AJ Staff hashtags in their mouths taped shut. We saw with Sky, we saw photographs from people in tiny little newsrooms in Accra and Ghana and in the Philippines and God knows all over the place. It was absolutely extraordinary, and I honestly felt absolutely incredibly proud of the way the unity came together.
You know, I reckon about probably 100 of them said at the end of the letter, when you're free, you're going to come and have dinner with me, you're going to come and have a drink. You'd be out for dinner every night. You get over there. Were there some messages from people you'd forgotten completely about from your childhood and from your study days?
Well, you mentioned one from South Africa. That school, the high school that she mentioned, was actually a high school that I went to as an exchange student in South Africa. I was only there for a year, and so to actually receive those notes were amazing. In fact, there's someone else here this evening, Sharon, who I went to university with, and we haven't been in touch for pretty much 30 years, huh? And yet it was enough, and Sharon has a letter in here too. There were dozens, dare I say hundreds of old friends who I thought had long disappeared into the woodwork, long disappeared into the past. And so, again, I don't want to sound as though I'm trying to do the glass half full thing, but out of this whole experience, for all of the difficulty and trauma, I'm constantly amazed by just how many good things are coming out of it. And the reconnections with old friends is a really big part of that.
I'm so pleased to hear you being so positive, because it's been a dark week for you. You know, I saw you watching the television as your colleagues were taken back into custody, and I'm glad that there's something positive this week, but I'm wondering what's next for the campaign. What can people here do to help you? And what's next for you? Okay. That's a big question.
Well, let's deal with the most urgent pressing thing. The Free AJ Staff hashtag. Please keep going with it. Tell your friends about it. Tweet about it. Write to your MPs about it. It does make a difference. A couple of MPs have said to me that, in fact, the pressure from constituents actually makes a difference, because it allows them to go to the Egyptians to say, listen, it's not just me, I've got these people on my back, and we can't have a normal relationship with you until you sort this out. It's about the public pressure. It does make a difference. Believe me, it might not feel like it, but it does. The letters that you all wrote to me were hugely important. In the last couple of days, I've asked the families of Baher and Fami to set up similar websites. And I can announce to you tonight that they have done that. In fact, literally just as I was driving over here, Baher's brother sent me an SMS saying Baher's email is freebaher@gmail.com. And let me just double check, so that because I know that I just want to make sure. Sorry about this.
Are you going to tweet those, Peter?
I will. And yes, it is freefammy@aol.com. There's the other one. freebeher@gmail and freefammy@aol.com. Please write, because I know it makes a difference. Even if it doesn't feel like it, even if you're sending these things off into the ether, it makes a difference, it helps them, but it also lets the prison authorities know, the ones who are having to screen these letters, that there are thousands of people out there who still give a shit and who are still fighting.
I know a couple of people were asking you when I walked in, can you travel anymore? What's your status? What's your criminal status? Where can you go and where can't you go?
Officially, I'm a fugitive. The Egyptians, we don't know for sure, we're still trying to figure this out, but if the system is working as it would normally would, then there's a pretty good chance that there's an international arrest warrant out for me. That means that any border that I cross becomes potentially a problem. My lawyers, at their most conservative, are saying don't go anywhere. The trouble is that Australia is a fantastic place to be. It's the world's greatest open-air prison, as the British discovered 200 years ago. But I don't accept this verdict. We're not guilty of anything. I don't accept confinement in any form, and frankly, being confined to Australia is a form of glorified house arrest. I don't accept it in principle, and I won't accept it in practice. We are compiling a list of countries that will probably not send me back to Egypt if I wind up being detained by a rather diligent border official. Most of Europe is probably okay. The United States is okay, except, as you all know, if you have to go to the States, you have to fill out that visa waiver form, and there's that question, have you ever been convicted of a terrorist offence? Well, I kind of do. Yeah, exactly. It's a problem.
You with tick celebrity box.
Yeah, exactly. Celebrity terrorist, what problem?
Often do a reality TV show.
We're fixing that problem. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is sending a message through the embassy to make sure that I can travel without any problems. Africa's potentially a problem because there is an extradition treaty which kind of ups the stakes a little bit more, right across the African Union. Any of the African Union states are potential problems. But again, we have some good friends at the Kenyan Foreign Ministry who I'm going to try and approach, and hopefully we'll be able to clear that.
Good to hear.
Anyone else? Yes.
What do you think of Egypt?
Well, funny you should ask. Actually, let me tell you a story. I have a problem with Egyptian politicians.
Really?
I have a problem with the Egyptian politicians. Yeah, I do.
We hadn't noticed.
There's this dungeon in the National Security Building where we go through interrogations. There's a dungeon down the bottom, and what happens is that all of the prisoners who are due to be questioned that day go into this dungeon. It's this big holding cell. And it is actually as grim as it sounds. It's a sort of cold concrete box right down in the very basement. And one of the guards was taking me out. He was taking me out for interrogation. They put me in handcuffs and was leading me in cuffs up to the room where I was supposed to be questioned. And in his broken English, he said, so where are you from? And I said, oh, I'm from Australia. He says, oh, Australia, welcome in Egypt.
Did he ask who you're back for?
The thing is that time and again, I had a genuine sense of compassion from ordinary Egyptians. Even the guards, at the time we were convicted, the guards were in tears. I'm not kidding. Our own jailers were in tears because they recognised just how screwed up the system was. Sorry, this is really getting me. And they recognised the injustice of it. So it's not Egypt as a singular lump. It's a bunch of assholes who use the system to try and cling on to power, to try and suppress the basic freedoms that we all enjoy. But God, there are so many thousands, millions of Egyptians who aren't like that. So As a country, I've got no problem with it.
How long were you there before it?
2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks. I was in Egypt only 2 weeks before.
To see the pyramid?
Imagine that. All that wanted.
Did your colleagues receive as many emails and things as you did, or was that just...
No, I mean, for Beher, as you can imagine, it was a lot harder. He's an Egyptian. Anybody that communicated directly with Beher ran the risk of being spotted by the authorities, and so the communication between either Beher or Fahmy were much more risky, much riskier for them from the inside. Fahmy was a Canadian and had a lot of support from the Canadians, but again, how do I say this? Not politely, but they didn't have the Greste family.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as we've heard, the Greste family is quite formidable, and if there's a reason that I'm here again today, if there's a reason that people know me, know my story, and feel as though they know who I am, it's because I'm standing on the platform that the Greste family built.
What do they think about you wanting to travel again, young man?
Mum's not real chuffed about that.
Neither am I.
How do we write to your brothers and your mum and dad?
Oh, that's a good question. There is an email address that existed. Let me find out. Let me see if I can find out a way that if you really want, and then if you'd like to write to them, then I'm just
congratulate them on a fantastic job.
There is an email address. Let me give you an email address. FPG Public Relations. It's a horrible email address. It's a hangover from the last one, but FPG Public Relations, and we'll make sure they get it.
Peter, often we hear from journalists discussion about the government and about a faceless organisation of a large scale, particularly overseas. But from your experience, did you get the impression there was one person or two people in Egypt who held your fate?
I don't know. I have no idea, and this is part of the problem for us. The system in Egypt is so opaque that we had no idea what was driving the decision-making process, who was really behind it, what sort of political pressures they were under, what it was that they were trying to achieve. We just don't know. So as much as I'd like to be able to give you an answer, I really have not a clue. What I do know is they're juggling some very complex political problems. I don't mean to excuse them for that, but it's a hellishly difficult place and dangerously polarised place. Any others?
What details are you writing to your colleagues in prison now?
Sorry, what?
What details are you writing in letters to your colleagues who are in prison now?
Oh, I'm telling them what's going on to support them. One of the things that my family kept saying to me was, listen, Pete, you don't get it. You don't understand just how big the support is, how big this campaign is. And I'd sort of say, I humoured them. I'd say, yeah, of course I don't get it. You know, how could I possibly not know? But inside I'm thinking, look, I'm a journalist. This is my business. I know what's going on here. I had no idea. I had not a damn clue. Really, I had no idea just how massive the support was, how widespread it was. And so they need to understand as well, because that's the thing that kept us going throughout, and that's the thing that will keep them going from here on.
So it underlines the fact that we need all to be sending them messages.
Please do. Yeah, please do. It will make a difference, I promise. Yeah.
Peter. Oh, sorry. Just a quick question. Do you have any concerns about journalistic freedom in Australia over the coming years, considering the political climate of the last 12 to 18 months?
Yeah, I don't want to make this a kind of political, political rant.
I wasn't going to ask you.
No, that's okay. I've said this publicly a few times before. I am concerned about it. I think one of the things that we're doing with the war on terror is using the war on terror as an excuse for all sorts of draconian legislation without really thinking about the consequences for the basic freedoms that have made our country stable, one of the most stable, prosperous and peaceful places on the planet. Part of that is freedom of speech and an open noisy, loud, sometimes a potty-mouthed press that has held governments to account and allowed free and open public debate. What we're seeing with the legislation is a very deliberate narrowing of the space in which we're allowed to work. In the war on terror, we can't. The war on terror is a war over an idea, over an ism. It's not a war over stuff, over anything tangible, which is the way it's been in the past. The trouble is that in a war over an idea, over a worldview, the battlefield is the media. That's the space where this conflict is taking place. And journalists have become targets in a way that we've never seen before. Now, the problem is that in this environment, if you as a journalist start to investigate or interrogate the issues around the war on terror, you become targets of both the authorities who start to investigate who it is that you're talking to, what's on your email, who it is that you're communicating with, and potentially lock you up as they did us. If you, from the other side, you're just as likely to get your head removed from your shoulders as Stephen Sokolov and James Foley discovered to their cost in Syria. So I worry that this whole abuse of the war on terror, the war on an abstract noun, as a friend of mine rather rightly put it, has what that's done to press freedom. I don't think we're having the debate sufficiently about the impact of the government's legislation on press freedom. And if nothing else, what we have to do, if Australia decides it wants that legislation, fine, but I think as long as it understands the consequences, and I don't think we fully understand the consequences.
So you continue to be a journalist?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not ready to quit. I still believe in this. I still think this is a worthwhile business. I know journalism has taken a few hits over the years. I know that our reputation is down somewhere in the gutter. But I still think, and I think if there's one thing that our case has done, is remind people actually why a free press really does matter and why it is worth fighting for.
Still with Al Jazeera?
Yes, still with Al Jazeera. But it's going to be a part-time job, because one other thing that this whole experience has done is that it's given me a platform. As I said, I think it's given me a platform not because of anything we've done, but because of what was done to us. But that platform is there. I've got lecterns and microphones and cameras and so on. And so if people are prepared to listen, then I'll talk, and I'll keep talking about press freedom. I feel like I've got a responsibility now, and so that's the other part of my life.
I should say that was my other motivation. There were two motivations for putting this book together. One was to see Peter freed, and the other is to continue to push for press freedom around the world. Thank you, Peter. What wonderful words to keep us all thinking, and a mission to go away and for us all to continue to fight the good fight. Before we head off to buy a book or two and ask Peter to sign it for us, he'll be sitting down over here when I move my computer here. I'd just like to run through some quick thank yous. Amy Birchall, who's here, she's travelled from Canberra. She wrote the timeline in the book and the section on comments. And pro bono, everybody who's done anything in this book has done it for nothing. Our designer, Wendy she designed the book cover about 10 times because there was the free Peter Greste and then there was the prison press and then there was the change. And Editia's printers, SOS Printed Media, I'm not sure if they're here, Kelly and Rosie would come. They always work hard to turn our titles around into extremely tight schedules, which Richard picked up on when I emailed him a couple of weeks ago. He said, I'll get straight back to you because I imagine your deadline is close. Yes. To Khaled Dasuki and AFP for agreeing for the pro bono use of the cover, the horrible covers that. I mean, it's when your colleagues were taken back into those pages, I was just beside myself. And Diana Primrose, David G, Diana, Sophie Harper for proofreading the manuscript. A bit of a family thing happening with us too. And Beverly Cameron and the team at New South Books for backing the book and ensuring it's in stores from Perth to Christchurch. David Penbrook and Ben Curry at Content Group for producing the videos on a pro bono basis. Huffington Post Associate Editor Kayla Dengate for giving the book and its cause such wonderful coverage today. Page 1 splash in the Huffington Post, global coverage. And thank you Berkelow's for hosting tonight, to all our speakers, and most importantly once again to everybody who wrote a letter to Peter and his family. You've made me cry dozens of times over the past few months, and I'm glad you'll be making readers everywhere do the same thing in days to come. Thanks.